Tisha B'Av. One of the 5 tragedies that occurred on this day was the destruction of Beitar. Now the Gemara tells us that Beitar was destroyed because of the beam of a carriage. What's the story? It's told in Masechet Gittin that the people of Beitar had a beautiful custom. Every time a child was born, they would plant a tree for that child, and as the child grew, the tree would grow with them until by the time they were ready to get married, their tree was very tall. And then what they do is they would have one tree for the bride, one tree from the groom, and then they would cut down the tree. Then they would go ahead using the lumber of the trees that they chopped down to build a beautiful chuppah for the bride and groom. Now this one time, the daughter of the emperor was riding by in her carriage and the carriage broke down, so her servants went ahead and chopped down one of these trees to use the lumber to fix the carriage. But the people of Beitar were so zealous about their custom that they went ahead and attacked the servants of the emperor's daughter and chased them out of town. Now the servants went ahead to the emperor and told them, the Jews of Beitar, they're revolting against you, and that's what spurred the emperor to go ahead and destroy Beitar. So what kind of trees would they use for this custom? The Gemara tells us that for a baby girl, they would plant a turnita. Rashi teaches us that this is a pine tree, just like the one behind me. They are very abundant in Israel. They thrive here. The JNF has especially planted very many of them. It's a beautiful and tall tree. But for a baby boy, they would plant an erez. That is a cedar tree. Now, those are very rare to find in Israel because their natural habitat is in the tall mountains of Lebanon. They need that high altitude. That's the climate that's best suited for them. And the mountains of Lebanon are the tallest in the region, taller than any other mountains in Israel, in Jordan, or in Syria, even taller than Har Hermon. And the cedar trees grow even taller. They are referred to in the Tanakh often as Arzei Lebanon, the cedars of Lebanon, and it's generally a symbol of might, of strength. But on the other hand, there's also sometimes a negative connotation to it of haughtiness, of ga'ava. That's why our rabbis teach us the erez, the cedar wood, was one of the ingredients in the purification ritual of a mitzorah, to recognize that part of his sin that brought about the leprosy was haughtiness. And in this story of Beitar, it was actually a cedar tree that was cut down by the daughter of the emperor, and perhaps it was their overzealousness and pride in their custom that led them to react in a way that eventually brought about their destruction. Now, turning our focus to the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, we also encounter the cedars of Lebanon there as well, because the cedars compose the primary material for the structure of the Mikdash. That story begins in Sefer Shmuel, when after David HaMelech conquers the city of Jerusalem and makes it his capital, we have Hiram Melech Sor wanting to make a treaty with him. So Hiram from Lebanon sends him cedars as a gift and builds him a beautiful palace. It's at that point that David HaMelech says, look, I'm living in a gorgeous palace of cedars, but God, the Aron HaBerit, is in a simple tent. Let me build a Mikdash for him. Now, the next day the prophet comes to him and says, God told me he does not want you to build him a house of cedars. Many years, for hundreds of years, God has been in a tent or in a mishkan. He never said, Lama lo benitem li bet arazim. Rather, God says, your son shall build for me a bayit. Hu yibneh bayit lishmi. So the question, I believe, is glaring. If the Mikdash, if a house did not find favor in God's eyes, then why is it okay for David's son to build it? The difference, it seems, is that he said, I've never asked for a house of cedars. Rather, your son will build for me just a house. It seems that the cedars were what did not find favor in God's eyes. Now, we know, of course, later on, Shlomo HaMelech does use cedars to build a Mikdash, and David prepares cedars for his son. But perhaps later in his life, David HaMelech realized that the cedars also did not find favor in God's eyes, because he writes in Tehillim, and we read this every Friday night, Kol Adonai shober arazim, v'shaber Adonai et azeh Lebanon. The voice of God broke down the cedars of Lebanon. That could be a recognition that all the strength comes from God, and that these cedars did not come to me from Hiram, from a king, rather from God, or an expression of frustration that God knocked down my plans to build for him a house of cedars. Now I know what you're thinking. It says in Devrei Hayamim that the reason David HaMelech could not build the Beit HaMikdash was because he was a man of war, and that's why Shlomo built it. It seemingly has nothing to do with the trees, the cedars, and the different characteristics of the trees. But I'm glad you brought up Divrei Yamim, because there is an important piece of the puzzle. It says in Sefer Melachim, and it's repeated twice again, the same pasuk in Divrei Yamim, so a total of 3 times. It says about Shlomo HaMelech that he brought so much wealth to Israel and to Yerushalayim that he made the stones, he made silver as plentiful in Yerushalayim as the stones, and he made cedars as plentiful as the shikmim, the sycamore trees, which grow in abundance in the Shephelah. Now this is a sycamore tree, and there's a few important things about this tree, which I believe is why it's mentioned. It seems that the Tanakh is suggesting that really using the cedars was not the right tree for the Beit HaMikdash, but perhaps a tree like the sycamore. What 3 things do we know about it? First of all, it was a local tree, and it grew in abundance. So instead of having to import from Lebanon and pay a heavy price, they would have had plenty, and it wouldn't have been a big burden on the people and on the nation. Part of the price that Shlomo HaMelech had to pay for the cedars was to give over 20 cities in the Galilee to Hiram Melech Sor. The second thing is that they grew in the Shephelah. That's the low foothills, as opposed to the cedars that grew high up in the mountains of Lebanon, a symbol of ga'ava, of haughtiness. The sycamore is a humble tree. Shafel, after all, also means humble. And the third thing is that the sycamore is a very good tree at restoring itself. You cut down a branch, it grows right back, and it grows back stronger. Even if you cut the trunk, it will grow back stronger. And that's why if you look at this tree, there's all these little branches coming out. Anytime the tree is blemished, a branch sprouts out. And there's many, many little branches showing how strong the tree is in reconstructing itself. As a matter of fact, in modern Hebrew, the word shikma became a verb. L'shakem means to reconstruct or restore. Now for this reason, I believe the shikma is a very good symbol of Bnei Israel, of our nation. As opposed to the haughty cedars, the Arzei Lebanon, the shikma is humble and also knows how to restore itself. It is resilient just as we are. And it is my hope and prayer on Tisha B'Av that soon we will restore ourselves again, rebuild the 3rd Beit HaMikdash with whatever kind of trees it will be built with.